Good afternoon. My name is Mercy Budu, and I am from Teal Trial Energy Advances Lab. And my talk today is entitled Performance Evaluation of Solid Oxide Fuel Cells with Humidified Hydrogen. So now, first of it is, what exactly are these solid oxide fuel cells? And simply put, they are electrochemical conversion machines that are able to convert like your hydrogen, propane, methane into electricity that we can then use for other purposes. And they work with a bunch of chemical reactions. So we have an anode, electrolyte, and a cathode, where at our cathode, you have your oxygen being turned into ions, traveling down to our anode, and then reacting with fuel to then release electrons. And now, one special thing about them is that they operate at relatively high temperatures, so they operate between 600 and 1,000 degrees C, and also they are what I like to call our fuel flexible. So what that means is that we're able to use a bunch of different fuels to generate electricity, from pure hydrogen to methane to ammonia and even ethanol to still generate electricity. So let's just look at how they compare to other energy generation methods. So the image on our slide right now shows a comparison with what is called conventional. So your steam turbines, where you burn coal to produce steam, and then that turns a turbine to produce electricity. So one thing that we notice is that our solid oxide fuel cells show a higher electrical efficiency as compared to these other methods. And when we combine them with something like a gas turbine, we get even more out of the same or relatively the same input. And another thing to note is that they are scalable, so we can use them to produce 1 kilowatt or 1,000 kilowatts. However, talking about all these benefits does not shy away from the problems that are associated with solid oxide fuel cell. So one major challenge is degradation. So over time, as you continue to use these fuel cells, you see a significant drop in how much electricity that you're getting from these fuel cells. And this is because we're operating at high temperatures, and also because you have impurities in the fuels that you are supplying to these fuel cells. And we'll get into different methods that they degrade in the next slide. So this slide shows different degradation methods that are seen in solid oxide fuel cells. The first image is nickel coarsening. So our anode, which is one side of our fuel cell, has nickel on the side. And what we see is that as you heat it to high temperatures, the grains on that anode begin to enlarge. And this reduces the surface area, meaning we get less power out of the same fuel that you supply into this fuel cell. Our second image shows sulfur poisoning. So if you have sulfur in your fuel, which is very common with methane and other biofuels, what happens is that the sulfur in these fuels then reacts with hydrogen to then attach to your anode. So this similarly reduces your active surface area, and you get less electricity. So this is not a desirable thing that we want to see. The third and fourth pictures are before and after pictures, after you supply a carbon-based fuel such as methane. So what happens is that this carbon then deposits on the anode of our fuel cell. And then that also, just like we've been saying, reduces surface area and reduces the amount of electricity that you get. And the last bit of this is also crack growth and propagation. Because we are constantly heating and cooling these fuel cells, what happens is that it begins to develop cracks, and these cracks then enlarge and then reduce your overall efficiency as well. Now, moving into what I do. So I am investigating the role of steam in solid oxide fuel cells. So previous research has already shown that when you add steam into a hydrocarbon-based fuel, such as methane, what happens is that it prevents that carbon deposition that we saw in the previous slide, where you see those dark little spots of carbon occurring on our anode. So steam is beneficial in such a case, but we haven't looked at how it affects our fuel cell when you're only looking at it with hydrogen. And this is where I come in. So the motivation behind this work is that currently we are producing hydrogen through steam methane reforming and also coal gasification. However, we're going to zone into that others picture, which is where our lab comes in. So other methods of generating hydrogen include electrolysis and also what we call metal-water reactions, which is what our lab does. So what happens is that when you produce hydrogen this way, what happens is that we have some steam that is then included in that output. So we want to know what happens when you supply the steam from these other methods into solid oxide fuel cells. And to do that, we have a very simple experimental setup where we supply hydrogen into a mass controller that controls how much hydrogen is going into our fuel cell. And then we mix it with steam outside of the fuel cell, put it into the fuel cell, and the excess is then ventilated outside of the building so that it doesn't harm anybody in the lab. We are then operating with a relatively large fuel cell for research purposes. So our fuel cell consists of 30 cells. On a normal day with research, we would work with 1 cell. However, we want to look at what happens at a larger scale rather than just a single cellular stage. So we're working with this large fuel cell, and it goes between 600 and 1,000 degrees. However, for our experiment, we're looking at only 650 degrees for optimal power output, and also just to avoid overheating it as well. So what typically happens is that we conduct our experiments where we feed in these hydrogen steam mixtures, and then we pass a current through our fuel cell and see the corresponding voltage that comes from it. So this will tell us the performance of our fuel cell, and it will tell us whether or not the steam is negatively affecting our fuel cell or not. And with this information, we then go on to calculating our efficiency and so forth and so on. So these are 2 images that we have gathered from 3 case studies. The first image on the left shows our output, our voltage output, and the second image shows our power density. So looking at the image on the left for now. So the first case in green is our pure hydrogen case, which is our baseline case, which we then compare the rest to. The second case in in yellow is where we had 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part steam, so about 33% of steam in our hydrogen. And the last case is where we had the inverse, where you'd have more steam than hydrogen. And what we can see in all of these cases is that as you add in more hydrogen, that significantly reduces how much electricity that we can get out of the solid oxide fuel cells. And we see the same pattern when it comes to power density as well. So there's less power produced when you put in more steam. And you might be asking, what then is the importance of this information? So with this information, we know how much steam has to be removed from our hydrogen generated from these other clean methods so that they can still release enough electricity without causing detrimental effects on it. However, what we do not know is the long-term effects of it, and that would be the next step in this research, looking at whether or not this is an instantaneous effect or whether over the life cycle of it, it will act like maybe our nickel or our hydrogen in reducing the total output of our energy. Thank you.